tell us what it looks like, how it grows, all the different things that kind of shape it, and why you made the decisions you did as a group. If someone in each group wants to draw it, draw the fruit, either the squash or the cucumber, draw the dish that it would be prepared in. But imagine we are just at this potluck and you've brought this dish and you've got your own specially bred cucumber and squash and the dish that really embodies all of its best attributes. And then just each group, if one person would be willing to kind of share it back to the bigger group when we get back, we'll hear what each team, cucumber or squash, decided to do. Sound good? Does anyone have any questions? Okay, and then when we get back, we're gonna give everybody like a pretty good chunk of time. Like I think we'll give you 25 minutes to do this. And then we'll come back, hear a little report back. And then I'll share a little bit about our breeding project with Korean summer squash and have a conversation with Mehmet about some of the squash preservation that he's doing at 2 Seeds in a Pod. Okay, so I will open the rooms and then you decide for yourself. And hopefully this will be pretty balanced, but if it's not, it'll also be very interesting. Are you able to choose the room? No?
I think so. If we actually no.
Do you have to perhaps like trigger the breakout room time? Like, do you have to like press something that's like, now go, or I don't know.
Let's see, I have breakout rooms, unassigned 8.
It seems like folks are going. Scott went somewhere.
Oh, Scott went somewhere.
You just have to put your thing over the number and then press join.
Oh,
It'll
cool.
Yeah.
I see it.
Thanks.
I don't think I can go because I'm the host.
No, Kelly, you can go.
How do I go?
Just hover over the. Okay. Well, I think everybody's back. How was everybody's brainstorming session? Productive? Okay, so we'll just take a couple minutes and do a quick report back. Is there someone from the summer squash group that wants to give the report back and tell us in your little mini squash lobby what summer squash we should all be on the lookout for next year?
I was in the summer squash group, and hi everybody. And we talked a lot about stuffing squash and the squash that, well, Mehmet has like a variety of really beautiful squash that he's growing. I don't know all the names of them, but for the way that they do it in Turkey, they cut the squash in half and stuff it. You want to get the squash that is easy to put on the pot, that will like sit well in the pot. And then the squash that in Palestine, in like the Levant region that we use, is like a pale green squash and has to be like about, I don't know, let's say like 6 to 8 inches and not too thick. You want them kind of smaller than the ones you find here. So you pick them when they're younger and like more tender and not bitter. And then you core them out and stuff them with rice and meat and then cook them in a big pot with usually grape leaves too. So yeah, I don't know if that's a good squash lobby. I feel like I just described the foods and I'm really hungry after talking about them for a long time now.
No, that's really good. And with the like you're saying, the squash from Palestine, like being thin, is it just about the ratio of like filling to kind of the summer squash itself, or like is it just like kind of how it looks?
I think it's how it looks, and you don't want that. Like if it's too big, then it's harder also for the mixture inside to cook all the way through. So when they're smaller, it's like it's easier. It's easier for like you cook it in a broth, so for the broth to like get in. Because when it's overstuffed, you end up sometimes having rice that's like undercooked, and then it also gets a little bit like too dense. So it's nice to have the smaller ones, and it's also like they're like more bite-sized, so it's more delicious and it like gets all the flavors.
Sounds so tasty.
Mhm.
I'm glad you said that, because Nadia, I'm glad you're here. I was curious just if there were, what differences there were, because I know some of the squash Mehmet is preserving, like it might have some overlap in terms of maybe origins. And then I know for stuffing, it was very important, and that would be some shared things. So maybe too, when we're talking about the varieties he's growing, it'll be curious to see if there is like some overlap or familiarity between Palestine and the region where Mehmet is preserving varieties from.
Yeah, I'd love to learn more about it.
Well, thank you guys. Cucumbers, we've got Catherine and Myra.
Okay, so this is our dream cucumber. It could be longer, but the paper kind of constrained us on how long we wanted. So you can see our group thought that crunch was the #1 important trait in this cucumber. A lot of us ate cucumbers fresh. I mean, some of us put them in soups, but we concentrated on a fresh version that we wanted to eat. Second, we thought about flavor, and we didn't know how to describe fresh, what fresh would be. Is that sweet? Is that not? But fresh kept coming up. I think the thin skin was really important trait as well, because we're going to eat it fresh. And we wanted also to see these beautiful stripes that we created. So our cucumber also, we imagined, would have a very bumpy skin. It gets bumpier because the flavor gets a little bit more bitter or acidic down here. And the color kind of gets darker with the bitterness or the acidity, which is very slight because we didn't want it too bitter. Or I don't think, did we say bitter? Acidic, sorry. So super bumpy and jagged at the end and curved. Super interesting, kind of prehistoric. Yeah, is there anything else in our group if you wanted to add? I don't know if I forgot any other traits of our dream cucumber.
I would just add, it was compared to a lizard that has a pigtail. So just think about what that would be like if it was a vegetable, I guess. All right, well, thank you, everybody. We're just trying to keep doing these little practices to just get at the heart of what all our ancestors did to breed these plants. Was it just paying attention, being inspired, accessing our imaginations, and then learning just what plants are, really capable of. So that'll just lead into, I'm gonna just try to whiz through a slideshow I made to kind of show you a little bit about the squash project that I've been working on for 3 years. So let's see. So ehobak is like a Korean style summer squash. And it's just been growing in popularity. Obviously, the main summer squash that like I grew up eating, like zucchini, is a much more recent introduction into Korea. And what's preferred is what's called like Korean summer squash, which is really a immature winter squash. And so if we think of like kind of some of the main species that we eat as squash, a lot of the summer squash varieties, like the kusa varieties that Mehmet and Nadia were talking about, acorn squash, zucchini, are all Cucurbita pepo. And these ahobak are Cucurbita moschata, which is more closely related to like a butternut squash. So it's just kind of denser. The conversion of starch and things is different than in pepo varieties, but not quite as dense as like a Cucurbita maxima, which is what kabocha are. So you see here, this is like kind of how classically they're packaged. And these plastic sleeves are actually put on the fruit as the flower is pollinated to keep the fruit super straight and to keep the very thin skin from being bruised. So kind of for cosmetics, so that it can just be sold. And so this is from Sempio, which is like a big Korean food brand. And they kind of just break down on their website, like some of the different culinary attributes of ahobak. So ahobak is here. It's kind of long and slender, light green skin, very dense and very sweet. This is called puthobak or green pumpkin. So yeah, more immature, kind of rounder pumpkin. Commercially, it's called like avocado squash as it's been introduced to the US, different seeds. And then zucchini is just called zucchini in Korea. And so even though it's kind of used interchangeably here, like a lot of people call zucchini ahobak, they are actually pretty distinct. So the main pros are just that, you know, as this kind of specialty product, in Korea, like production has been on the rise and it's become like in regions where they're able to really grow it in large numbers. It's like one of the highest grossing agricultural exports. The distinct flavor and texture has been just like regarded as like kind of a unique Korean crop, and it can be grown year round because most times it's grown in a greenhouse on trellises. The downsides are that it's just really fertilizer intensive. And so if you read reports in Korea from their sort of agricultural extension, it's really dependent on a heavy sort of fertilizer regimen to get that kind of like really high quality fruit. Climate change is really affecting farmers in Korea. And so like intense, more days of extreme heat and higher temperatures has caused like a lot of crop loss in this sector. And then like, especially last year due to COVID, lots of just like the price has been really affected. And so there's been like a lot of dumping of fruit and just a lot of waste because for growers that don't want to absorb the cost of wrapping each individual fruit in the plastic, the price just drops significantly. And so it's not really worth it for a lot of farmers to do that, just given all of the inputs. And then it's hybrid seed. And so farmers, you buy a new seed each year, right? So that's just a couple of years ago in the news, it was just talking about farmers not being able to recoup the costs because the price to consumers had dropped so low that because it's so input intensive, farmers were just dumping the fruit because they were already operating at a loss by the time it came time to sort of harvest and then market it. So they chose to dump the fruit and take less of a loss than trying to get it to market. So it's just showing like all the parts of the equation are just kind of off in terms of really not favoring farmers. So that was kind of the main goal and why I had talked to a friend who's a plant breeder from Davis about this, because it seemed like something exciting like in the diaspora to do that could also be shared back with folks in Korea. And we have so much squash germplasm just because squash is indigenous to, you know, these different parts of the Americas. So we wanted to come up with like just a solid open pollinated ahobak squash that was really selected for low or no input organic systems, that it would still have that thin skinned fruit with super dense flesh, but maybe being in a bushy or semi-bush habit to also remove the need for infrastructure like trellising. So ease of harvesting and a little bit of a productivity bump with the bushy habit. So in 2019, the first year we did this, we grew a bunch of different parent lines that we just thought would be interesting. So we grew some different zucchini types that had just like really kind of open architecture, really easy to harvest and really prolific. We grew some different ahobaks that we really liked the fruit from. So we just grew all of these different commercially available seeds or seeds that we got from different farmers like around the States and in Korea. And we made initial crosses and then just saved those seeds. And then last year was year 2 of this project. We planted what essentially was our F1 or first generation from those crosses. So all the seed we saved from taking the pollen of one plant and pollinizing a flower on the other plant all of that seed was grown out. So we got to see what all of that progeny essentially looked like. From that population, we either crossed it back to itself, like self-pollinated it, or we made another cross either to kind of reinforce traits for the fruit quality, or just kind of cross something new into it to add like another element. And then in this year, year 3, we planted our second generation as those different populations start to segregate, and we self-pollinated all of that population now just to reinforce as like the genes start to differentiate, self-pollinating it, just to kind of reinforce the traits that we wanted to see or get it to start acting consistent at least, so we can continue to make selections next year. So our first approach is what's called an interspecific cross. And so this is where we took a cucurbit of pepo, a variety called Raven, which is just a nice zucchini, and we crossed it with a Korean variety that's commercially available, which is Cucurbita moschata. So we took the pollen from the Korean squash and we put the pollen into the fruit-bearing flower of Raven, because we felt like the plant architecture and that bush habit was more likely to be carried on the maternal side rather than on the pollen side of things. So we wanted to take the pollen and hopefully introduce some of the fruit quality into a plant that would maintain that bushy habit. So Raven is here. You could see all the red arrows just point to fruit-bearing flowers or young fruit, as you can see. So you can see this first flush of fruit, it's just super productive. It's pretty open. So as I'm walking down my rows, it's pretty easy to see fruit that's ready to harvest. And it's staggered really nicely, right? So if I know I'm gonna pick zucchini every other day, I've got this to pick today. I've got that picked to, 2 days from now, and that to pick the day after that. And then I've got a bunch of other stuff here ready to grow. So super high yielding. So then we took this, which is the Korean squash. As you can see, it's more vining, but it's still semi-compact. So short internodes, these red arrows point to the nodes. The internode is the space in between there. And the nodes are where you're going to see fruit-bearing flowers. And so the shorter the internodes, it means more fruit per vine. So already had some things going for it in terms of its growth habit, but the thin skin was super easily bruised. I'm not wrapping my little individual fruits in plastic. And so it really had to go right to whoever was eating it the day of, like even just one day in storage, any little place where it rolled on something or bumped up against another fruit left a pretty considerable bruise. And the fruit set was a lot lower without any fertilizer. Like I would get some of, the fruit starting to mature closer to the crown, and then other fruit as it's set mostly aborted just because of the energy needed to kind of keep maturing it. And the water demands were a little bit higher than what I wanted to see. So this is my F1 after I crossed Raven with the Korean squash. So you can see we've got a somewhat bushy habit that initially kind of was pretty compact before it started to vine out. And all of these red arrows again are showing fruit. So we got it to be, accomplish what we wanted in that it was a little bushier and not quite as sprawling, a heavy initial fruit set, and then kind of good continual fruiting pattern. The fruit shape ended up being pretty nice and pretty much what you look for at Ehobach. The skin was a lot darker, but I thought it could be kind of cool to kind of go in that direction because it still had a really beautiful pattern. And yeah, the skin was thin, but I think because it was darker, it was less noticeable when there would be like something marring it cosmetically. So a little bit easier to do without that plastic baggie. And then this year, this is from, so basically last year we self-pollinated this, just took one of the pollen flowers from this plant and pollinated the fruit-bearing flower on the same plant, just to start inbreeding it and reinforcing those traits just kind of within itself. And so then its offspring looks like this. So really nice and bushy this year, really prolific fruiting. You can kind of just see all of the little baby fruits here. So very productive. The fruit, yeah, still pretty consistent in terms of getting to be like nice and dark when it was actually mature. Um, excuse me. The one thing I will say is a downside is that you can see the leaves look very consistent with what you see as zucchini. They're a little bit more prickly. They're deeply lobed. And I think the one downside is last year when we did this through our CSA, we had like 2 weeks where we also tried to evaluate pumpkin leaf, just because hobaki, like pumpkin leaf, is used a lot in Korea and lots of other parts of Asia. And this definitely wasn't the preferred type of leaf. Like it is just really coarse. It's hard to handle. When it steams, it's just like kind of tough and fibrous compared to the ahobak leaf, which is just generally a little bit softer and nicer to wrap things. So we kind of missed out on that trait. Our second approach was to do a cross first to develop a parent line that would have powdery mildew resistance, and both are growing on compact vines. So Metro is a butternut squash. You can see here, very prolific fruiting. Butterbush is another butternut squash. Also look at all of this fruit, semi-bush. So we made that cross, ended up with something, yeah, very consistent with what we saw in both parents, which is super short internodes and heavy fruiting with good general vigor. But the fruit was really inconsistent. And really not consistent with what ahobak would look like, but we were just curious because the flesh was really nice and people preferred the taste of it because it's super starchy. So we figured like there's some promise in terms of fruit quality. There's a super small seed cavity because rather than the seeds maturing the whole length of the squash as they do in zucchini and ahobak, if you think of cutting open a butternut, the seed cavity is all here in this bulbous part. So you end up with kind of more dense flesh and not as much sponginess in like a marrow type squash. So we thought we will continue this, but this parent definitely has to be mixed with something else. So last year, instead of keep inbreeding that, we ended up taking that initial cross butterbush times Metro and then crossing it in with our Korean ahobak variety. And this is what we ended up with this year, which is a little bit better in terms of the fruit not being quite as dramatic in terms of that kind of bulbous cavity, more evening out and like more reasonably, like I could see bringing this somewhere and referring to it as ahobak. Our last approach that we'll talk about was to still work within Cucurbita machata. Lunga di Napoli is like a Italian heirloom, and then to butterbush, that kind of short internode bushy type butternut. So Lunga di Napoli already has like a really nice eating quality as a young squash, but it's really not productive, like because the fruits are enormous. But it also has a high carotenoid content in the Lunga fruit. So the fruits are really deep orange. Even when they're young, there's a little bit more pigmentation to it. So it seemed like what could be interesting is our dark green skinned ahobak. If you slice it open and then the young squash has like really bright orange flesh, it would look really dramatic and striking. And we thought also with these parent lines, we might end up with something that if you miss it and you don't eat the ahobak young, once it matures, it still is a little bit better. Where most of these other types of squash, the old squash is really not very delicious. It's kind of watery and not really suitable to use. So we have Lunga di Napoli, really long and sprawling. Vines are over 15 feet long, but it is very vigorous because it's open pollinated and heirloom, and the fruits are pretty enormous and really delicious as a mature winter squash. So here we have that first cross between butterbush and Lunga di Napoli. The fruit is actually pretty nice. So dense fruit, pretty moderately fruiting with that nice small seed cavity. And then in last year, what we did was we took that initial cross, Lunga times butterbush, we crossed it to a Korean ahobak, and we crossed it to the Korean green pumpkin or avocado squash to kind of see which would yield a better fruit. So you can see here we have a lot of variability this year. Some maintain that heavy vining sort of attribute, and some tightened up and got really bushy. But these are from the same parents basically. So you can just see how much those traits start to segregate. And then this is some of the fruit. So still a lot of variability. This looks more like what you would expect from Lunga. And this kind of shows a little bit more of that weird intermingling of some butternut, some lunga, some Korean summer squash varieties. But I mean, that's pretty promising because there's like 5 fruits in here just right around the base of the plant. And then with crossing it with the green pumpkin, we got a lot of really nice fruits that aren't quite like that avocado squash to varying degrees. But yeah, nice dark green flesh, really dense fruit. And then kind of it remains to be seen if any of these will be kind of edible as winter squash. But something like this is pretty promising to us because you can see here again, we've got like good fruit set kind of along the whole vine. And this is, yeah, again, with no fertilizer. So that's basically it. And I know it kind of raced through it because I want to definitely talk with Mehmet for a while about what he's working on. But does anyone have any questions about any of that process or anything you want to do in terms of making your own Frankenstein summer squash?
Okay, I have a somewhat general question on squash crosses. How do you decide? So you mentioned, you chose the maternal line because you thought that it would carry over those traits. How do you know, if you want specific traits to emerge, how do you know which one to choose as the pollen receiver or the pollen giver?
I think if I had the time and space, I'd make reciprocal crosses for all of it. Again, like I'm not a professional, so I don't quite know, but I know that, so there's differences in terms of some traits being carried like in nuclear DNA, which can be carried by either parent, but then some traits are really only carried on mitochondrial or chloroplast DNA, and that's all maternal tissue. And so I think things that are really fundamental, like plant architecture, I tend to think more as like a maternal inherited trait. Versus some of like the fruit quality and things, if that makes sense. But I do think that if you're able to, it's best to make the cross in both directions and then just kind of see, because yeah, I don't know. I think a professional squash breeder would probably know like, oh, what genes are held on what part of the DNA. But we're just kind of doing this old fashioned, I suppose. And the other confusing thing is like, if you noticed, a lot of our initial crosses were between hybrids. So we use like different F1 hybrids and cross those. And my big question to the breeder was like, why not segregate the hybrids first, get some promising like members of that population, isolate them as siblings, and then make crosses from that once we've actually narrowed down like what traits are carried on what. And he said that it's like pretty heated debate. Like some people feel very strongly about that approach. And he personally feels very strongly about mix the hybrids, get as many novel combinations as possible, and then start inbreeding and segregating from there. But I think that's the one tricky thing of just noticing like, yeah, it's kind of weird if you imagine you're crossing 2 F1s that in their F2 would both be segregating, but now you've made a cross, it's just kind of like, how many times more possibilities is there versus having like, maybe a dozen segregated siblings that you're then making crosses from. But in any event, in our little trials and network team on the Mighty Networks, we're going to be sending out seed for people that want to trial this, just because now as we're bulking up this seed stock and making these selections from year to year, if people want to grow these out and have the space to maybe see a lot of weird stuff happen, then we'll be sending seeds through that just to kind of like have other people trial this and give us our feedback about what they like and what they don't. Here, you can see that. But now is a good time to introduce Mehmet, who is one of my favorite farmers and seed keepers, and just very good moral support for lots of the nonsense that happens in the seed industry. I feel like if I see something that makes me angry, I can just message Mehmet about it and just be like, hey man, this is trash, right? He'll usually confront it more than I would. And so, yeah, I just really admire him, and he's doing really amazing preservation work. He's just introduced so many varieties you've probably seen on Instagram and things like that. Like Mehmet has really been someone who's helped bring a lot of these varieties to the States and accessible for, folks from Turkish and Anatolian backgrounds. So I'll let Mehmet just introduce yourself and maybe just hear a little bit about some of the squash you're preserving. And I really want to get into with you, you had posted something a little while ago about, this squash, which you talked about as a culturally appropriate vegetable. Like this is a culturally appropriate squash variety. And I thought the language was super thoughtful. And I saw you get a lot of questions about what the heck does that mean, culturally appropriate? So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that, because I think, in this group, that's a lot of the heart of what we're doing, is saying like things are really rooted in culture. So I'll let you take it away, Mehmet.
Thanks, Kristen. So I am a seed keeper. I think, seed keeping, seed stewardship part of things sometimes actually overwhelms the running a seed company side of things. I feel like oftentimes we are like a nonprofit organization who are trying to also stay, self-sustainable. But so since 2000, I think 11 or 12, when I came to the realization that, the varieties that I grew up eating in Turkey was not necessarily in danger, because when you say, things are going extinct, they're in danger, you also make the assumption that, you are the savior, and then, all of a sudden, you find out that actually, they're not visible, but people, they don't go talk to TV, but they keep, they going on with their lives, and then growing all these seeds in their small gardens and villages and rural side of the country. So I don't want to assume that, many, some these varieties are just lost, and I am the only keeper. But I guess in terms of documentation, at the very least purposes, there was no visual source for anyone to go and look at these fruits and the produce that's grown with these varieties. And because although I grew up with eating quite a lot of different fruits and vegetables that my parents would buy from the grocery store, after getting involved with the seed business, seed keeping, and then eventually starting a seed company, I got more aware of the USDA seed collection that I briefly mentioned about this in the breakout room, but USDA sent specifically one of its well-known horticulturists, Jack Harlan, in 1930s and 40s to Turkey to collect thousands of seed sessions. And then when I say session, it means that it may be one single variety, and then sometimes it is a collection of different varieties, just because that person, that a horticulturist, stopped by a seed merchant and collected that specific the seed of that specific let's say town, or even village, and then without knowing that actually it was a mix of different kinds of seeds that were kept in traditional growing system of people, which is also oftentimes you see referred to as land race, meaning that people basically saved seeds based on specific traits with the food diversity and security and climate adaptation in mind. So long before the modern plant breeding was there, actually people, for thousands of years were doing this, selecting and breeding seeds and such. And it is funny that modern plant breeding, actually there's not a single crop that modern plant breeding came up with, right? So that we eat, actually all of the agricultural crops were the fruits of amateur. Well, I don't also want to say amateur. I mean, these people actually knew what they did, but um uh amateur breeding. So it's a very I don't know if you want to get into that, Kristen, but landrace, I think the use of it is quite the thing that I think it can get really trashy, the way it is used to be turned into almost like a marketing uh thing, just like the what is it, regenerative farming, using that as a commercial uh, market theme, as if indigenous people all over the world, didn't do that. It's almost like it feels like a landrace gardening. I mean, what does it mean? Landrace gardening? There's no such thing, because landrace varieties are outcome of traditions and community work, basically. So you cannot just come up in your, I think, garden with an individualistic approach and then try to breed some varieties and then all of a sudden say, oh, I came up with a landrace variety, or landrace gene pool. I think that's not culturally possible. That's culturally quite inappropriate. Basically, you're claiming something that's against the definition of the term. Um, but people came up. So I was showing so there was one variety that I was specifically looking for in the USDA collection. And then, and again, I want to stress that the squash is not a native crop to where Turkey is, right? But there are many staple crops that geographical area domesticated, people of that geographical area domesticated. So in my experience, whenever there's a crop that actually is relatively new to that area, or I guess vice versa, in we cannot talk about it for other different regions of the world too, but anyway. So like, for instance, wheat is 12,000 years, is a 12,000-year old crop, and then it was domesticated. Einkorn, for instance, was domesticated in where southeast Turkey is now. So whenever there's a new crop, such as squash, I see that people actually adapted it quite fast. I think that has a lot to do with the people that passed down the tradition of the agriculture for thousands of years, and then I think they gained some sort of wisdom and accumulated knowledge that made it possible for them to um, adopt a foreign crop that wasn't known to them pretty easily, quickly. Before squash came in, there was melon, and Turkey, again, one of the homelands of melon, and melon was used for stuffing recipes. It was a very common fruit to be used for stuffing. But then once squash was discovered by people, it became a staple fruit for stuffing. In addition to bell pepper, that's another issue. The bell pepper that's sold in grocery stores in the United States is not culturally appropriate for my kitchen traditions, for my culture's kitchen traditions, because the flesh is too thick. It doesn't absorb the juices of the meal, um, and then they're huge. because and super crunchy. And since the flesh doesn't absorb the juices, it doesn't really cook, and then you get this very metallic, thick flesh in your mouth when you're eating. If you make a Turkish recipe using that kind of bell pepper. Same with the squash. Squash in grocery stores are usually, imagine crookneck. Usually it's another actually indigenous squash variety, um, of North of Americas, and then it's curvy, too narrow, and then if you halve it, basically what are you going to crave? If you try to crave the neck, it's too narrow again. You will puncture the most probably the skin, and then you won't be able to stuff it. If you stuff it, the stuffing is going to fall out as you cook it. And if you do the flower end part, use the flower end half, then it's not gonna sit on the pot. So I was showing in the breakout room that this is a squash that I have been growing for a long time, that I got in the first place from the USDA germplasm. Um, but I'm hoping that we can release the seeds in our catalog, hopefully next year when we have enough seeds. But this is a bit too big for to harvest it for stuffing. But then the shape would be this shape. So this is a very culturally appropriate squash shape. Uh, in addition to its texture and flavor, the texture is amazing. I think it doesn't fall apart. It holds very well. And skin is, when you carve, you make sure when you carve the inside of it, there's enough thickness that can hold the integrity of the meal together. So, but that thickness doesn't bother you when you eat it because it fully cooks. So it's not like it doesn't stay hard or anything like that. The texture and the flavor is amazing, I think. And then you halve it and then carve it, stuff it, and then sit it on the um bottom of the pot. Am I a co-host so I can um, show a couple of pictures?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Share screen. Let's see. Yeah, so Nadia was talking about kusa, which is a traditional squash for her. So this is another very it's basically, I think I'd say, top one culturally appropriate variety for Turks and other cultures of Turkey. It's called sakız. It's very similar to actually kusa. I think they are different varieties. This one is a bush. Well, this suckers has two grow habits. One is a bush habit. The other one is a vining plant. So this one is a bush. And the pictures are from actually Iowa. This year, I sent to a grower that grows seeds for us, some seeds, so that we can have it in our catalog this year. Um, the kusa, that's, I think it's on seed market. I see it on different catalogs, and then that's a vining plant. This one is very compact, but it's towards the end of the season, I think it gets the habit of kind of like a maybe semi vining, but it's still a pretty small plant, compared to the yield it provides. Another picture from it. So this is one type, right, of fruit, and then when you look at this one, you can see that landrace characteristics that were kept in the gene pool of the variety, which sometimes it's more egg shaped, and then sometimes the fruit on the right is a perfect stuffing shape actually, and two fruits on the actually left, which are kind of overgrown at this stage, also have the perfect stuffing shape, and the color is also typically this color is preferred for stuffing recipes. And then that's two other fruits. The one on the right is kind of interesting. It almost looks like a, I don't know, butternut shape, but um, it isn't. So both fruits actually look like that. But you can see all those variations in shape. So this also, in addition to the one that I saw, so I never saw this one growing up. I never, I don't recall my mom using it, buying it from a grocery store and using it. But then I found it in the seed collection of USDA, and it's from Northeast Turkey. So again, as I said, something that we did not, that wasn't mainstream, uh, was probably used in cultural context, in Northeast Turkey for that same purpose. So these are pretty much so because we are a seed restoration preservation farm, I primarily currently focus on making sure we propagate enough seeds for varieties so that we can make sure the parental lines are secure. um but I also I very intentionally select seeds when there's a traditional land race variety that I come up with, as in this one. It's another. So all these fruit shapes basically come from um one accession that I got from USDA. um and when I select seeds, I only use the pollens of that specific plant to hand pollinate them so that I can keep the shapes intact. Uh, which is sometimes I question, is it against the idea of keeping a traditional seed? Because it's the way people keep the seed together, right? They basically keep all these different shapes and sizes of seeds, of fruits together, and then save seeds in a mixed way, so that in the following reason, if something happens, and it's usually true. I mean, this is fascinating. Sometimes you look at a seed population, the crops, the plants in that population, and then an extreme weather event happens, and then all of a sudden, I don't know, like half of the population is gone. The crops that those plants fail, and then the others survive. So there's an intention in that. People who basically selected seeds um, for these varieties intentionally kept them mixed together so that there's some sort of coding, climate, chaos, climate change, whatever you want to call it, and also keeping the food diversity intact. They kept it mixed intentionally. And there's one last, because that avocado squash reminded me something. One last picture I want to show you. This is a uh, this is another squash variety that is from Northeast Turkey with short growing seasons. Um, when I was browsing the USDA germplasm back in, I think this was in 2012 when I first found this, I found a seed with a Turkish identification. The horticulturist who visited Turkey sometimes took notes, and that sometimes you make you smile, because he basically recorded whatever he was told, and sometimes he misspells, but sometimes it was perfect, spelling of the word. And then I saw the keyword yumurta, which means egg in Turkish. Um, there was no picture of it, so I was very curious about it because it said fruits are look like eggs. So I never ate it. Never ate such a squash growing up. So I was really curious. And then sure enough, when I grew it, it was um, an egg, egg shape and almost, a egg collar, a typical egg collar squash, that was mesmerizing, I think. And then you need to harvest it. One trick about it is that you need to harvest it very soon after it reaches perhaps a duck egg size, so that it doesn't get too seedy. And then, but it makes amazing stir fries. This one I wouldn't say a stuffing squash, because I mean, what are you going to carve? That's not, nothing is gonna be left if you basically half this and try to carve it. I would love to just visit that area and see, what people traditionally used it, or currently use, if they are still growing it in that area. But so that actually reminded me, or avocado squash, and I was wondering if you would be interested in using this, and breeding in your breeding project. But we stir fried this with garlic and olive oil, and then I think it made some, it made an amazing meal. So I don't know if this gives, insight, but as I said, there are some breeding projects in mind. But again, it's just too many seeds that I feel obliged to uh, grow first, and make sure that the seeds are secured, like secured in the sense that, like I can propagate the seeds, and then have the parental line with me, before I can move on with different kind of breeding projects. But yeah, I have some actually. Also, another, I think, culturally important squash type would be the one that's grown for its seeds for snacking. Um, One type is hull-less. It doesn't have any holes, and then the other type is a long. The seeds are actually quite long for that one, and grown typically in central Turkey for just roasting purposes. So, but I think if I started a breeding project, I would first begin with. I think I would be interested in focusing on this one with improved yields, and I'm not sure if I would want to. I think I love the skin is really gorgeous. I think the texture, but I'm not sure if I would mind if that we can hold the texture and the fruit shape intact. I wouldn't mind. I think if the shape changed a little bit, but then we ended up with a whining squash that had better yields than this one has to offer. So that's one thing that I can think of. But I think, yeah. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Mehmet. I have like a lot of other questions. Real quick, did other gourds ever like kind of make their way and get used as sort of summer squash? Because I know I feel like gourds, like Laginaria, uh, ended up in parts of West Asia and parts of Europe, much before any of these Cucurbita species did. And so is that something as well? And did that get phased out, or is that still used for other things?
Yeah, definitely it is used in southeast Turkey. And the way people use it is they grow it and kind of let it, or that the fruits overgrow, and carve it and dry it for winter use, to stuff in winter. Similarly, the melon that's also known in the US as Armenian cucumber, um, which is ajur in that region. Uh, there are types of Armenian cucumber varieties that are also carved and dried and used in winter to for stuffing. And of course, they can. I can imagine, once the fruit is dry, you can they still uh, use it to cook with it in summertime. But specifically for winter storage, that makes perfect. Same with eggplant, right? It's just, you don't have to it's a taste of summer, and then you basically make the use of summer's bounty in wintertime. But yes, there are gourd varieties. Specifically, there's one that actually we have it in our catalog, and hopefully we can bring it this year back, which is a long fruiting variety that is used for stuffing, but not because in Asia it also is gourd is used a lot for soups, in soups, right? The small, when it's young, the fruits are young. I don't, I haven't come across that kind of a use for its fresh fruits. So it's the recipes that I came up with are stuffing recipes, but gourd has a place, yeah.
And
In
Nadia, if you're still here, I know the yakteen is a type of gourd. Like, is that something that gets eaten young in Palestine, or?
Yeah, it is. They pick them when they're younger, so they also make it, they can stuff it or use it in a stew too. So it's preferable to have them when they're young.
Well, I know we're a little over time, but if folks want to stay on, if there's any questions for Mehmet, I mean, I just think it's really interesting. I wish I could hear more about all of these selections. So I just like squash is so like promiscuous and prone to like interspecies mingling, and so I think it's just something that really does capture a lot of imaginations. And I know like for like in academia and things, like squash is usually evaluated just by microwaving it, you know, like you cube it and you microwave it and you taste it, and there's like a illusion of objectivity, you know, like, oh, what has merit. But I think like, yeah, just the work that you're doing and the selection that you talked about just really highlights how flawed it is for us to think like our seed saving and things should be like centered around that idea that there's like one platonic ideal of what a squash should be, and that we would like derive that information from microwaving it or something instead of you know, like people talk about deaccessioning like lots of different types of vegetables because they don't know how to prepare it, you know, and I think if you don't really experience it in the way that it like its breeding was informed, then you might just never see the kind of value that it holds. And so I think, yeah, so many of the varieties you're sharing are just so special in that regard, like, and you share so much of the story. So just really appreciate, you know, what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's yeah, I mean, my mom still doesn't have a microwave, so you know, even you know, I understand the way it's evaluated, but even you know, to when in breeding projects, but also even in the kitchen, uh, that doesn't have a, you know, that microwave doesn't have a place in culture. So even now, I mean, yeah, because
Well, I
it
appreciate too, you're a seed company. And I think like a lot of seed companies, when I've talked to them about like our approaches or what our goals are with second generation, they're like, you're giving people way too many exits off the freeway. Like this is a disastrous idea for a seed company to do this. But you know, like all those exits off the freeway, all those different types of squash you just showed, like as a seed company, most times you're just trying to narrow that down. So how do you balance that? Just like the demands of being someone who's commercializing seed, but also really your heart is in kind of maintaining and evolving this, but still with a focus on biodiversity. And that feels like it can be at odds, or at least it's been treated like it's at odds by like the broader kind of commercial seed industry.
yeah, I don't I think about that, you know, a lot, and I don't think my lifetime is enough to complete this kind of a work. But it's um uh, the the passion about keeping the, I think, so many varieties from so many different regions, and then making selections among them. There's one pumpkin. Well, winter squash variety that uh, we once introduced here in the United States, and then the following year I was not happy with the following year's crop, and then I took off the catalog. And then there's one grower in Oregon that keeps sending me emails every year saying that, where's the squash? You know, when is this going to come back? And you are the only supplier for this, and I hear it's a really great squash, but then it's just so disappointing that uh it's not still in your catalog after that that break. And so and then I saw that person post on a forum about the same squash, saying that, oh, this company was the only supplier, and then they don't carry anymore, they don't respond to my emails because I stopped responding to this person who keeps asking for the seed. And then where can I find it? If you guys have it, can you send me some seeds? So if I'm not personally happy with what I see when I grow it, if it doesn't fit the culturally appropriate way of the seed, that seed should be kept, then I prefer not to have it in our catalog, because something happened. I don't know what happened actually. Maybe there was an accidental cross, but there's one. It throws the plants throw these fruits with wider lighter color, lighter skin color, and that's not something that I uh, I saw my mom ever had use for the dessert that she made with the squash. Always, and what I remember seeing at grocery stores also, the fruits always had this grayish, greenish skin color, and I'm sure the texture is gonna be similar of those two different types of fruits, but I'm still trying to understand what's happening here, and sometimes it takes years. So that squash that I showed, the one with egg shape, I think it took 7 years to have. I think we have now like 10 pounds of seeds in our seed room to propagate that much seed. um I'm a little bit obsessed with details also, which I cannot sometimes, I can't decide if it's a good thing or not. Because I'm very detail oriented, and I get fixated, to make sure that what I'm looking for is actually in there. So there's all this genetic variations that I keep, but only a small fraction of it actually makes it into our catalog. And as you said, so I go kind of against the norms of the seed industry in the US. I even keep the seed names intact in our catalog, which are not, English names, which make it, because I don't like to make it convenient for people to look for something that, like I don't want them to say, oh, I cannot say, I don't know how to pronounce this seed's name, but it's that squash, like, I mean, so I prefer people to put some effort into, as much as we do, right? I do as an immigrant living for 15 years in this country now. As much as I learned English and trying to understand the culture here, I like to see the similar effort coming from the customers who buys for seeds from our company, which I'm sure reduces the number of orders, because people get frustrated at these details, these stories and such. So we are kind of a non-traditional uh seed company in that sense, but I like doing it that way too. I don't know. But yeah, yeah, there's challenges.
Well, Scott put in the chat the website for Two Seeds in a Pod. And yeah, definitely check it out. I'm excited. I was hoping some of the watermelons that you shared the seeds for would be ready by tonight and I could show them off, but I prematurely cut into one and yeah, I was really kicking myself for rushing it. But yeah, excited to hear more. And next month we've got chilies and eggplants with Emily, and that'll be exciting. And yeah, I think the coloring book will come out just sometime soon, and that'll have all different cucumber varieties for you to look at. And then, yeah, if other people, we have recipes, anything else, just keep posting it on the Mighty Networks. And then also, Emily Yao has set up our wonderful second generation Instagram. And so there's reminders and things on there too, just so that you just get bombarded with information, I suppose. Just trying to purely overwhelm you in the digital realm with plant information. So you can find it anywhere if you need reminders. But thanks, everybody. Hope we'll see you soon.
Have a good
Thank
evening.
you.
Thanks so
Bye.
much.